Hello and welcome to the preview on the Athletic FC. I'm Michael Bailey, stepping into the hot seat this week, here to set you up for the weekend's football. Tim Spiers and John Mackenzie are with me. Say hello, gentlemen.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
But we'll keep up the fixture formation. It's a 6-4-0 this weekend with a Saturday 8 p.m. match. That's Liverpool versus Aston Villa, which is the game we're going to focus on. So there's no lunchtime football on Saturday. Go out and look at the leaves on the ground instead. Maybe sweep them up if you're feeling nice. Or watch the EFL Championship. Maybe Wrexham. There are plenty of 12:30 p.m. kickoffs elsewhere. Back in the EPL, there are 4 UK 3 p.m s. That is Brentford against Bournemouth, Crystal Palace against Fulham, West Ham versus Everton, and Wolves host Southampton. Brackets Tim Gulps. Come 5:30 p.m, it's Brighton versus Manchester City. That's turned into a big game for City. Then Sunday at 2, we have 3 matches. Manchester United against Leicester, the last of the Rude era. Yes, it's Forest against Newcastle. And then finally, we have Chelsea against Arsenal, which we will get to. But first, to Anfield. Yes, flying Liverpool against fumbling Aston Villa. Let's begin with the home side, shall we? Liverpool were 4-0 winners midweek against Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen. Now, Tim, there was a show in its own right on this feed earlier in the week, but Arne Slot to Liverpool, looking like a stroke of genius right now, isn't it, Tim, in these heady days?
Hard to say anything different than that, really. I mean, 16 games, 14 wins, top of the Premier League, top of the Champions League, which is still weird to say, but true. Carabao Cup quarterfinals as well. I mean, it's almost perfection, really, all the way up to November, which is pretty incredible when you sort of remember a few months ago when there was all the sort of devastation and emotion at Klopp leaving and genuine fears for the future, because as good a history as Arne Slot has, we've seen before when football dynasties have come crumbling down, it's pretty hard to build the next one, and it normally takes time and patience. He's sort of defied convention in the way that he's come in and not made any signings and still sort of remodeled and given a fresh look to this team, and yeah, they're winning every single week. So, and we said in the early weeks of the season that Liverpool needed to be tested and that their fixtures were quite easy. Well, they have started to be tested quite seriously now, and that they've beaten Chelsea, beaten Leverkusen extremely convincingly in the week, got a good draw at Arsenal, and now it's I think Villa, Real Madrid, and Man City coming to Anfield next. So the tests will keep on coming, but yeah, there's so much to like about this Liverpool team. People are focused on the defence in the early weeks of the season because they've got this freakishly good defensive record, but they're not a defensive team, and they're not an overly attacking team either. Lots of clean sheets, lots of goals. So some weaknesses may emerge over time, and injuries may directly affect that. But for now, it's hard to find any weaknesses, and you just got to give as much praise as you can to what Slot's doing.
That's kind of slightly amusing, I suppose, because you could argue that Arne Slot was not first choice, I guess. Yeah, which may be one way to put it, which is kind of interesting dynamic to it. Producer Abby was listening to the radio this week, and a question came up apparently whether this is Arne Slot's team or more of a Jurgen Klopp hangover, John. And to me, I definitely see that you kind of have overlaps from the previous head coach from when takes over. But I mean, where is this? Whose team is this? Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, we like to attribute all of the qualities of a team to the coach that is there at any one time, but teams are nothing more than aggregations of players who play in a certain way, have certain profiles, right? So with Jurgen Klopp going, those players are still the players that they were before. And I think under Jurgen Klopp, they've built a squad who are, quite an intense, direct attacking set of players, and that still remains, despite the fact that Arne Slot might be wanting to play a little bit more of a patient game with them. We've seen it time and time again where actually this team has been dug out of a hole by being a little bit more aggressive towards the end of games, upping the intensity and getting wins as and when they're needed. So yeah, I think that's a sign of a good manager, right? Who he plays his game, but can use the strengths of his team to get results as and when are needed. I think one of the things we've seen from Slot as well is this ability to make half-time changes, which pull his teams back into games. So we've seen, I'd say, a fair amount of, fairly underwhelming first halves, but a lot of the time in the second halves, we've seen them pull around and start being, the dominant team in the game. And I think, again, that sort of comes down to me to good coaching, right? To be able to say, well, the approach that we've tried at the beginning hasn't really worked. Let's lean into the strengths of this team and see if we can get anything out of it. And it's a combination of that, but also obviously smart tactical decisions has meant that they've been quite a flexible and resilient team in that respect. So yeah, it's been quite interesting to watch. I'm still a little bit hesitant. Maybe this is just me as a sort of small C conservative tactico being like, oh, I don't want to like throw everything out and go, this team is a title challengers. But yeah, as Tim was saying before, it's getting harder and harder not to say that by the end of the season Liverpool will be there and thereabouts in the title conversation.
Arne Slot is still sort of figuring out what he's got exactly at his disposal and what they're capable of, Tim, because we saw him midweek, Luis Diaz playing centrally, scores a hat trick. I mean, watching it, some of that was you wouldn't necessarily directly put it down to the role he was playing necessarily. And kind of part of me was wondering whether, most Salah would look at that and think, well, why aren't you giving me a go down the middle, boss? But I mean, that did work really well. And I guess that could be something that Arne Slot does moving forwards too.
Yeah, maybe. He's obviously still figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of certain players. But I think just to add to John's point, it really speaks to the professionalism of the squad that they've probably had to manage themselves a bit in the summer and manage the dressing room, but they've obviously got the senior players in there to do that. But they've had to adapt to such a different personality. I mean, just from the post-match interviews, they couldn't be any more different, really. And obviously new ideas being given to them as well. So to be open and willing to take those ideas on board from having someone who's left who they obviously had such a close emotional attachment to, I think we have to pay tribute to the professionalism of the players. Really, they kept their standards so high and arguably improved on them this season. I mean, it also kind of hints that maybe it was the right time for Klopp to go. I think it certainly adds weight to that. And if the players were kind of feeding off Klopp and his emotions, in a good way for so many years, I guess you have to suggest they were probably sort of feeding off his lack of energy and his tiredness at the end that he sort of spoke about. So, all the way that they play on the crowd and the comeback wins and everything like that, they're very different this year. So, yeah, I guess it was time to go.
John, finally on Liverpool, let's talk about the game against Aston Villa. I mean, whereabouts can Liverpool win this? Is it a pretty straightforward question for you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because I think, as we've already mentioned, Liverpool are a team who do like to sit a little bit deeper on the ball and wait for opponents to come onto them to create the space that they can then attack. And as we know, Villa are a very, very passive team, really, under Unai Emery. They play in this sort of very reactive mid-block. And I think that we could see maybe similar to what we've seen in some of Liverpool's games in the first half. It actually is it's almost like a stodgy game. And it'll be interesting to see how then Slot reacts in the second half, if that is the reality. So, yeah, I think this could actually be a little bit of a tricky fixture for Liverpool because of that tactical matchup. And yeah, I don't think Villa will give away a huge amount. I don't think they'll put Liverpool under a huge amount of pressure in an attacking sense, but I think they might prove quite stubborn to break down, and the sort of tempo of the game will not be one that actually suits Liverpool. So I think it could be an interesting fixture.
Oh, Aston Villa, a 4-1 loss at Spurs, a 1-0 loss at Club Brugge in semi-controversial circumstances. So are they on the decline? Let's hear from the Athletics villain-in-chief, Jacob Tanswell.
Well, it's probably the worst time to play Liverpool, not only because of their excellent results and performances, but also because of Villa's recent poor run of form, and probably the worst they've been under Unai Emery. I know they've not lost back-to-back games since May 2023, and that was so important last year in terms of how they bounced back from defeats. But this year, things haven't got really good going, apart from those 3 Champions League wins where obviously Villa were fantastic, especially against Bayern Munich. In the league, it's been a mixed bag, and I think for Villa, the key is just to get through this game and then go into the international break, potentially resetting themselves and finding their confidence and finding their form back.
It's quite a catchy line, I guess, Tim, that this is the worst Villa form under Unai Emery. But I mean, how tricky is that? I guess it's a question whether it's temporary or something more worrying.
Yeah, I think this is something that we predicted would happen this season for Villa, with having to combine the Premier League with the Champions League, and we saw it with Newcastle last season that unless you've got a huge squad, and Villa weren't able to sufficiently add to their squad in the summer, due to financial reasons, then you're not going to be able to quite full pelt on both fronts. And yeah, in the last 7 since that big win over Bayern, it's 2 wins, 2 draws, 3 defeats. I don't think they're managing games very well, particularly when they're ahead, which was a bit of a trademark of theirs last season in a good way. Jacob said in a piece last week about their tentativeness, which isn't a good sign. And I do wonder if, maybe that's to do with the amount of big games that they're playing and they're not attacking with as much sort of vim and vigor and energy as they did last season. Maybe the energy just isn't there, and that kind of impacts their transitions. And I know John says, not a particularly sort of team famed for their pressing, but their energy certainly in transition was massive last season. And also a number of individuals are just below last year's levels, like Ollie Watkins and McGinn in particular. I think he's the one that when he ticks, Villa tend to tick. And then John Duran's sort of freakish run of scoring from the bench was getting them out of holes. And that was never going to last. You're not going to get a substitute score in every single game. So I guess they're reverting to the mean a little bit, but we shouldn't get too carried away because they're still in a very good position.
I think one of the things I've noticed from Villa is that, like, under Unai Emery, they're one of the best prepared teams for games, but that can also come with a downside, which is that if the plan doesn't really work, sometimes they can look a little bit clueless. So,
and if they haven't got as much time to plan, right, with these big Champions League games.
Sure, yeah. But I thought, for example, against Bruges, that they got blocked out quite nicely by Bruges, and then they, for the whole game, didn't really seem to find any solution to the way that Bruges were just stopping them when they had possession of the ball, and that was that for the game, and they barely put up any chances, and basically got picked apart. You can talk about the unlucky penalty, but it wasn't as if Villa didn't have time to get back into the game, and they didn't really have any solutions once they had that goal to come back from. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where sometimes it can work out in your favour with Emery because you'll just dissect a team. Other times it'll be like, oh, the plan hasn't worked. What do we do?
Yeah, John, Tyrone Mings is back as well. Do you see how that might alter Villa's build up or the way they're going to approach things, other than maybe moving him further away from goal kicks?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mings is interesting because they're going to play Pau Torres, aren't they, instead of him for most games, because he's basically just a sort of Unai Emery cheat code in build up. The thing that Tyrone Mings had that Villa didn't have when he got injured first time round was defensive solidity, particularly in aerial situations. So they've been quite weak, I think, ever since Mings got injured at clearing chances coming in, particularly from set pieces, but also from open play, from wider areas, crosses into the box, which I think towards the end of last season in particular, teams started trying to leverage a little bit more. So I guess it'll probably be a bit more of an as and when approach to certain teams who are going to cross more than others. So whether or not he's used as a defensive option in those games, I don't know. But yeah, it is a sort of tricky one when you want to basically play both Mings and Torres, I would say. They both play on the same side, and I don't think that it's the sort of thing you can get away with playing Mings on the wrong side as well, maybe. So it definitely is a conundrum, but I expect it to be Torres first and foremost, and then maybe Mings, tactical reasons.
Grand stuff. Here's something I enjoyed listening to the Totally Football Show with James Richardson. Natalie Jedra relayed her conversation about how Unai Emery and John Duran's relationship plays out on the training pitch.
Last week, I spoke to John Duran.
Ah, nice.
Yes. So, yeah, that was a very interesting experience because...
To speak to John Duran?
Yes, it was. Because he said some things that made me wonder about the dynamics in the daily basis there, especially in the training ground. No, it must be interesting because he said, when I asked about Unai and his role in his development and his progress, and he said, it's kind of a relationship of love and hate. We fight all the time, but he said that with a laughing.
Lovely. Right, let's have some positivity then. Villa are really good at scoring from set pieces, Tim. So where can Villa win this?
Set pieces, I reckon. Where can it's hard to make a case really, just because Liverpool are so supreme at the moment. Yeah, I guess they played Wednesday night in Bruges, a great film by the way. And yeah, they need to rediscover that energy, and they need certain individuals to rediscover their performance levels from last season, and that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. So Liverpool haven't been behind too often in games this season. There you go. Score first and see what happens. That's my advice.
I'm sure they'll take it. Leaves us with predictions. What do you guys want to go over? Who's been doing well this season? Have you guys? Is there a clear?
I've got every prediction right so far. It's incredible.
Sound, yeah. Well, imagine those underlying numbers. Great work, John. Go on then. Well, you better go first.
I'll go 2-0 Liverpool.
Shay, Tim.
3-0 Liverpool.
Right, let's move on then, shall we? There is a rather large match on Sunday afternoon, a London derby, a feast for the ears and the eyes. So feels producer Abby. It is Chelsea against Arsenal. 3 league games without a win, 2 defeats on the bounce in all competitions. But they weren't so bad against Inter.
It's must win if they want to win the title, I think. They're already 7 points behind. I remember saying on last week's show that this was a defining week for their title ambitions. The Inter game, the Inter game is more bad timing. I don't think a defeat is going to damage them in the Champions League, but it's bad timing with the run that they're on, that they've gone and lost another game. But yeah, it was a defining week in the Premier League, and we saw what happened at Newcastle. So yeah, if they want to win the league, I think they've got to go and win at Chelsea this weekend. If they fall 10 points behind Liverpool in November, you'd say that's irretrievable. It's amazing how everything changes so quickly. They look so stable and consistent and set for a title challenge a couple of months ago, and then they had that nightmare at Bournemouth and the Newcastle defeat. They didn't beat Liverpool at home, and now Edu's leaving, and talk of Arteta maybe sort of under pressure to really get this right this season. And it's crazy. You look at Liverpool getting it right at both ends of the pitch in terms of their defence and their attack, and Arsenal just getting it wrong at both ends of the pitch. The defence looked weak all of a sudden. Goal scoring is an issue. This is something we spoke about at the start of the season that they really could have done with another goal-scoring addition in the summer. I think that's coming back to bite them right now. Problems.
Stability soon becoming predictability. Handbrake Off is the Athletics Arsenal podcast, and here is Adrian Clark's take on Chelsea.
Chelsea's central midfield is strong, isn't it? With Caicedo having a fantastic season.
He's playing really well, actually.
Yeah. I think he's probably been the best central midfielder, maybe alongside Gravenberch this season at Liverpool. Those two have been excellent. Lavia has come in and provided a better balance alongside him, and then you've got Cole Palmer if he's fit.
If he's fit, and wouldn't that be great if he's not? And I know it's ridiculous, but in the end, he's such a danger.
If he's not,
we don't want to see him.
If he's not fit, I think we definitely win. If he's fit, I actually still think we'll win, but it'll be harder.
Adrian Clark in conversation with the brilliant Ian Stone there. John, if Cole Palmer doesn't play, as could be the case, how much is that going to affect the way Chelsea play? Because my mind says a lot.
Yeah, I think it's been funny watching Enzo Maresca's Chelsea, because I think a lot of people saw him as a system manager, and often, the system managers are seen as sort of curtailing the freedom of their players a lot of the time, getting them to squeeze into these strictures. But actually, what we've seen from him has been, I think, fairly open in terms of just setting up a basic structure and allowing the players to play pretty much the way that they might want to play. So they've been quite a direct team. They've played in transition really well, because they've got players who play in that way. But I would say the downside to that is that you then do rely on the technical brilliance of your players to produce results, because you're relying less on the system to do that for you. So missing someone like Cole Palmer, I think, is massive, because he's almost a sort of point of gravity in the middle of their team. He's given a huge amount of flexibility. They play him almost as a 10, but with the ability to move into certain pockets of space depending on how Maresca reads the opponent giving up that space. So, for example, in the last game, we saw him drifting out into the left-hand side against Manchester United. But in the second half, then moving across to the right-hand side, where they flip the system around completely. And they do this in such a way, I think, as to create space and opportunities for him and his teammates around him too. So I think the way that they've used Cole Palmer has been really quite fascinating as an example of how you can use a player like that to really give your team benefits. So yeah, and then on top of that, you add the fact that he's just a fantastic finisher, creator. He can drop deep. We saw the goals the goal he created the other week, where he dropped really deep and played the ball in behind. But also, yeah, cutting in from the right hand side onto his left foot, scoring goals from that kind of distance, picking up free kicks, goals. It feels like forever since we had a fairly regular set piece scorer in the Premier League, and he is doing that as well. So yeah, I think all in all, it means that he is the sort of fulcrum around which Chelsea moves. So if he's not there, Arsenal fans should be very, very happy indeed.
Oh, I love him. I guess Arsenal fans, Tim, probably feel the same about Martin Odegaard, and he did come on for a sort of a mini comeback at the end of the Inter game, and he could well be in contention. I guess it's a balance for Arsenal, isn't it? Because his return, but then potentially losing Declan Rice would be a sizable blow as well.
Yeah, I guess so. But this has been their issue in recent weeks, that they haven't coped with their injury problems as well as they probably should do with the squad that they've got. And yeah, you look at their midfield versus Chelsea's, ironically a bit of a contrast in that Chelsea's is now performing very well, something that maybe we didn't expect at the start of the season. And Adrian talked about Caicedo there, and that's involved leaving out Enzo Fernandez, which I think is one of the things that Enzo Maresca's got right so far, and leaving out big players for the sake of the team. And I guess he's going to leave big players out whoever he's playing, but yeah, they've got a pretty settled team, which is not something you'd expect to say about Chelsea, whereas Arsenal really haven't at the moment.
It surprised me how bad defensively both teams' records are in the table. It's surprised me quite a lot. They're conceding well over a goal a game, and also it's worth pointing out. I mean, Arsenal, Chelsea currently 4th and 5th in the table, I think. But we've also, I think Duncan Alexander popped together the expected points table, or had a look over it, and these two sides should be 9th and 8th respectively. So Chelsea 9th and Arsenal 8th. So I mean, have they both kind of overperformed a bit, John, so far, or is that maybe not as bad as they are?
Yeah, I mean, I would take an expected points table with a big pinch of salt at this point after 10 games. You can be skewed by a result. So I'm just trying to think, like, Chelsea probably deserved to lose to Bournemouth according to the expected points metric. So that sort of thing just flips in against you. So will mean that they drop down quite a way. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I think that in terms of like the performances they've been putting up, I think they've been relatively well worth those sorts of performances. There's been a few games, I think there's 6-2 against Wolves. Sorry to bring that up, Tim, but even that was, it was a remarkable overperformance of expected goals, which, sometimes happens in those results. But yeah, I would say that Chelsea are heading in the right direction. I wouldn't read too much into the expected points table right now. And yeah, as we've said, they're quite a direct, dynamic, attacking team, which I think means that there's going to be some games where they'll just blow teams away, and there'll be other games where they concede first and then they have to sort of slog a little bit against a deeper line defence, which means that they will struggle. So with all of these things, it's all about consistency. That's basically what I determine whether or not a team is going to do well in the season. And I think with Chelsea so far, I would say that they're a great team who aren't really consistent, if that makes sense. So as a result, yeah, that can explain why there's a bit of a discrepancy in the expected points table.
With the to channel my Enzo Maresca freedom and giving, let's have a prediction. Tim, you can go first on this one.
I reckon 2-2, Michael. It's going to be fun. 2-2.
That is going to be fun. John, you?
I think that Arsenal are going to win 2-1.
Ooh. Let's have a look at some of the other games then. We did ask you, Tim and John, which games you'd like to talk about. Tim, you answered with a surprising option, that being Wolves against Southampton. What tagline would you like to give this? The desperate derby?
19th against 20th. This is the last chance saloon, I think, for Gary O'Neill, who... I saw a good tweet this week that from someone who said, Wolves fan, who said their partner had given birth in May and their child has yet to see Wolves win in their lifetime. That's how serious it's getting now. We're talking lifetimes here. It's 1 win in 20 for Wolves, which was against Luton at home last season. Burnley have more Premier League points than Wolves since March, and they were relegated in May. We've spoken a bit on this pod towards the start of the season that Wolves had a horrific run of fixtures to start the campaign, which was true, but now there's Palace at home and they're still not winning, and they should probably have lost that game, and now it's Southampton at home. So yeah, with 8 points from 20 games, which is sort of Derby 07-08 form, I don't see how O'Neill survives, to be honest. If they lose this, maybe he clings on with a draw, maybe he clings on with a win. David Moyes is available and attracting interest of supporters. John's shaking his head. Can't wait for the debrief on that one when he gets appointed. But yeah, I guess in a change of approach for Wolves in recent years, they're actually okay at scoring now, but their defence is just absolutely abysmal. And I do have sympathy for Gary O'Neill in that respect because they sold Max Kilman and did not sign anyone. But yeah, regardless of that, the squad is mid-table level. And to be really cut adrift at this stage of the season is time for a change, I think. Regardless of what happens this weekend for me, I think it's time for a change.
It's a big game, isn't it? Because whoever loses is going to go down and whoever wins is going to go down as well. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, good news for Wolves is they have won each of the last 5 Premier League games against Southampton. So that's good news. That is good news. Russell Martin is still in post at Southampton as well, which I went off for a week and came back and he was still there. And I was kind of like, well, that's almost surprise to me. Taylor Harwood-Bellis as well has been named in the England squad, Tim.
Yeah, a bit of a surprise, that one. I saw that and saw he's got his first call up. I thought, oh, he's in the under-21 squad for the first time, is he?
Ringing endorsement there.
Yeah, he's got a bit of pedigree. He's certainly gone under the radar this season. But yeah, Lee Carsley throwing him a bone and a couple of good performances. You never know.
It's the way to do it. John, you didn't reply with a match you wanted to speak about, but that doesn't mean you don't get to speak about a game, you lucky fella. So I've dipped my hand into the ball pit, and the fixture that's come out was Tottenham against Ipswich, the form table derby. Apparently, do you like form tables, John?
I couldn't tell you the last time I looked at a form table, to be honest, Michael. Why is this the form table derby? Are they both playing well or badly, or one of them's playing well and the other's playing badly?
It's a great question. Let me fill you in, because Tottenham sits second in the form table. Ipswich sits second from bottom in the form table.
Surely the form table derby should be Wolves versus Liverpool, and presuming that Liverpool are top of the form table.
Well, yes, but that's possibly another way of looking at it.
Yeah. Yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think there's been lots of conversation about Ange Ball working. I know that Jack wrote a piece on our site about how the numbers are pretty good for Spurs this season so far, and obviously as a result, the Spurs had that crazy fixture against Galatasaray midweek where they ended up losing. Again, I talked before about consistency being a real important aspect for me when I'm judging teams, and I think Spurs are like one of the least consistent of the big teams. There's certain games where you watch them play and you think, how are this team ever going to lose a game ever again? And there's games where you watch them and think, how has this team ever won a game ever equally? So I suppose that for me, and that's very much the Ange Postecoglou way, right? It is very idealistic. It is very we're going to try and score a goal, and when we've scored a goal, we're going to try and score another goal, and when we've scored another goal, we're going to try and score another goal. And as a result, it means that they do put up good attacking numbers because they do commit forward, but it does mean that they are potentially open for conceding goals as well. So there's been a few games this season where they've put up good numbers, but they've been undone by a single or a couple of situations. I'm thinking the Leicester City game right at the beginning of the season where they largely dominated the game, but then one goal conceded and it just completely changed the fixture. Same with the Newcastle game as well, where all it took was a couple of moments for Newcastle to actually break through them. And so again, it's another one of those things where the question for me is always consistency. Is your tactical approach consistent enough to get you wins, or is what you're doing here almost like leveraging attacking situations so that in some games you'll blow teams away, and then in others, the gods will turn things against you. So I think there has been some changes this season with Postecoglou's approach. I think we've seen elements of maybe a more pragmatic approach from him, but for me they are quite minor tweaks. There's not really been that big sort of, okay, we're getting caught out in these sorts of situations, so we're going to make this big tactical change. It's been more, let's take off James Maddison and bring on Papa Sarr, for example. So, which again, it's not every tactical solution needs to be a massive structural like Pep Guardiola. Oh, let's start playing John Stones in midfield. But yeah, I do think that I'm sort of interested to see how Postecoglou goes for the rest of the season with those sorts of tactical tweaks.
Tim, you've taken in the Tractor Boys experience on a few occasions this season. Is there something you've seen that can give the Ipswich supporters a little bit of hope?
Yeah, I've been to their last 2 games, coincidentally, and Yeah, the less Ipswich FC, more Ed Sheeran FC was my big takeaway from going to Portman Road last week, because Ed Sheeran's face and voice and name were absolutely everywhere. Never seen anything like it. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. Football team, well, I went to see them lose at Brentford 4-3, and then 1-1 against Leicester. If both of those games had finished on 90 minutes, as per football regulation rules, then they'd have 4 points from those games. But because of stoppage time and conceding goals, they've only got 1. And they had 10 men for both of those games. I guess you could put it down to bad luck, but really, you've got to be seeing those games out, 10 men or not. And they're doing a lot of blaming referees at the moment, which I not really a massive fan of. Playing the victim a little bit in terms of decisions going against them, which, I don't really agree with. But an issue with Ipswich is they've used 27 players so far. 27 from 10 matches. Only Southampton have used more, which perhaps says something in itself. So I think it's the big issue for Kieran McKenna is trying to sort out his best team, probably mostly from an attacking point of view. They've got a lot of good but not great attacking players. You think of like Sammy Smoditz and Jack Clark, Amari Hutchinson, Liam Delap, Connor Chaplin came in and did well against Leicester. George Hurst came in and scored against Brentford and then was dropped. So he's still figuring out his best 11. I think they're a good team. I think he's quite malleable with his tactics, and they're obviously very committed for him. It's just a matter of figuring out that formula. But once they get a couple of wins on their belt, I think they'll be sort of there or thereabouts to stay up this season. I don't think they're going to get cut adrift.
Well done. You've solved that pretty well, Tim. Well, that's good work. Let's have a little look, shall we, at Forest Newcastle, the Chris Wood derby. It's really interesting. Forest have been the subject of another show on this feed. Are Forest good this season? They look good this season, are they?
Yeah, I think so. I think usually when a team like Forest is doing well, you look at the numbers and you're like, okay, they're giving up loads of possession, they're hitting teams on the break, they've got the players to hurt teams in that way, absorb pressure and then go direct. And when you've got players like Anthony Elanga, Callum Hudson-Odoi, and Morgan Gibbs-White, along with Chris Wood as a focal point, you're always going to cause problems. But I actually had a look at the numbers this week, and I noticed that in the 4 games in the Premier League where they've actually had more possession than their opponents, which are usually the fixtures that can cause you problems when you're a team like Forest, they've not actually lost any of those games. They've drawn 2 of them and they've won 2 of them. So this isn't just a team who are just very good at counter-attacking. This is a team who, when they need to actually be the protagonists in games, they're able to pick up points as well. So yeah, I think maybe slightly overperforming their numbers. I'm not sure they'll finish 3rd this season, but I think that they'll be a top half team. And it's nice to see. I think they've gone under the radar a little bit because they've had such a couple of crazy seasons with recruitment and ownership stuff, and actually just a little bit of consistency, a little bit of solidity, and they've really turned into a pretty decent mid-table side.
Great stuff. Well, let's hear from the Newcastle team, as in our writers, not Alexander Isak and friends. Pod on the Tyne looked ahead to this fixture against Forest.
Still need to find consistent performances away from St James's Park, though, George. Don't they? That away form is still an issue.
Yeah, that's fair enough, and absolutely that becomes the next test for them. But on the form that they've showed over the last couple of days, there's no reason why they can't go there and get a positive result. Forest have been outstanding this season. I mean, that is arguably the story of the season so far, certainly one of them. So it's not an easy challenge, but if Newcastle show the levels of commitment and defensive solidity and aggression that they've shown in the last couple of matches, they're more than capable of getting something there.
Yeah. Just very briefly, in terms of, I mentioned about confidence was the message that was coming out pre the Chelsea home game. The sort of immediate responses after Saturday again was looking for and basically saying we need to do this away from home. So there's a recognition inside the club that that's the next step now.
Great stuff. Let's wrap up, shall we, with one final game of Guess the Headline on Monday, or maybe more simply put, what do we expect of the things that we'll be talking about come the start of next week?
Wheels off at City, maybe, after a 4th consecutive defeat in all comps. I think Brighton City is one of the most watchable games of the weekend. I'll certainly be tuning in. Brighton with their recent form and City with their recent form looks like a classic in the making, Michael.
Yeah, I think the big match will tweak the narrative one way or the other, right? If Chelsea beat Arsenal, I think we'll be talking about Arsenal having been Deniso for the season, and then the question about whether or not Chelsea can go deep in and finish in the top 4. And I guess the other way around, if Arsenal do win, then the question is going to be, is this it? Especially if Martin Odegaard's back, is this them? Turning the tap and they're going to push all the way back up to the top. So yeah, I think that'll be a fun narrative switcher.
Have Arsenal turn the tap? That's the headline I want to see on Monday.
You can see why I work in the journalism industry, Tim.
Well, it's lovely to hear you both chatting away. That was much fun. Thank you so much to Tim and to John, as well as to Abby, Rachel, and all the team. Search The Athletic on your podcast app to see the full range of podcasts, to see our full range, be it Tactics, Club podcasts, and right here on The Athletic FC. Thanks to everyone who has been listening and watching on YouTube. There will be more on Monday. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend and enjoy the football.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.